Hello, second grade Smarties, and welcome to Wit and Wisdom Module 3, Civil Rights Heroes, Lesson number 3. So let's start by reviewing our pizza slice question for this chunk of lessons. Our pizza slice question is, what injustices did people face before the Civil Rights Act of 1964? And the pizza bite question we are wanting to answer today is, what's happening in Martin Luther King Jr. and the March on Washington? So for the last lesson, we introduced the text Martin Luther King Jr. and the March on Washington. This was an informational text that gave us information about the civil rights movement, as well as information about Martin Luther King Jr. So today we are going to be reading this book for a second time. Now, remember when we read this book the first time, it talked about how people from all over the United States came together to march in Washington in a peaceful protest. So it talked about people coming from New York. So this red dot that I'm hovering over, that is New York City. And remember, it talked about how a man roller skated all the way from Chicago, and that is this red dot. It said that there were people that walked, rode buses, and drove hundreds of miles to peacefully march in Washington, D.C. What do you notice, or what do you think about where people came from to march? What do you notice about this map? Here's Washington, D.C., this red star. What do you notice about the places people came from? Tell me in the puzzle. So something I noticed is that people came from different places and they traveled long distances to peacefully protest against something that was an injustice. Segregation, right? We learned about segregation means to be kept apart. And so people came from all over the United States to peacefully march in Washington, D.C., which is our nation's capital. So as we are thinking about reading this book for a second time, we're taking little bites at a time at this book. We are going to be reading this book in 4 sections. We are going to find a topic for each section, and we are going to find 2 points that support each main topic. But before we read, there is a word that we have heard a couple times now called segregation. Now, there's an action that I want us to keep in our head with this. Segregation is the action of separating people based on the color of their skin. So this started with Jim Crow laws. Now, Jim Crow laws were laws that kept Black people and white people apart, or people of color. So Jim Crow laws were created to keep people segregated based on the color of their skin. So that is a word that we are going to hear a lot. Segregation means separating people. All right. So we are going to be exploring, saying it again so we get it stuck in our brain. We are going to find the main topic of a text and supporting details for each topic. So let's start with our first chunk of pages. August 28th, 1963. It is a hot summer day in Washington, D.C. More than 250,000 people are pouring into the city. They have come by plane, by train, by car, and by bus. Some people have walked all the way to Washington from New York City. That's more than 230 miles. One man has roller skated from Chicago. It has taken him 11 days. By late morning, a crowd has gathered at one end of a long, narrow pool. Nearby is the Lincoln Memorial with its statue of Abraham Lincoln. Why are so many people here at this place on this day? It is because 100 years ago, President Lincoln helped to free the people who were slaves. It was during the Civil War. President Lincoln knew that slavery had to end. Now it is 1963. There has been no slavery for a long time, but are Black people and white people treated equally? No. All right, we're going to pause. Here's our first chunk of the text that we're going to find a main topic. So Miss Mason is going to model for you what our topic was. So we could say the main topic is that in 1963, that is the year that this book takes place. In 1963, many people from all over the country came to Washington, D.C. We can say that is the main topic of the first section of this text. And the details that support that is people came by train, car, and bus. Some people walked, and people gathered at the end of a long pool near the Lincoln Memorial. So my main topic was that many people came from all over the country to march in Washington, D.C. That's our main topic. Our supporting details are that people came by plane, car, train, and bus. Some people walked or roller skated, and the people gathered at the end of a long pool near the Lincoln Memorial. Now, for this next section of text, I want you to think, what is the main topic? What is the main idea of these pages? And that is why people are in Washington today. They have come to protest. They will speak out against something that they think is wrong. In the South and in some other states, there are laws to keep Black people and white people apart. Black people cannot eat in many restaurants or stay in many hotels. In movie theaters, they must enter by separate doors and sit way up in the balcony. On public buses, they have to take the seats in the back. There are signs that say for whites only. Even water fountains say white or colored. Which of these fountains look nicer to you? Black people and many white people want things to change. It is time for a change. It is past time for a change. In the crowd are some grandchildren and great-grandchildren of slaves. Many of these people have been part of protests before. All right. So, what was the main topic of this section? Why were people protesting? Tell me in the puzzle. Why were people protesting? People were protesting against segregation, right? They were protesting against Black and white people being separated. What are some supporting facts that we saw in this section of text? I'm going to go back. I want you to think, what are some supporting details that we learned? For example, we learned that they protest against segregation, something that is wrong. What are some details that support why they were protesting? Think about these pages. Why were people protesting? Tell me in the puzzle. People were protesting because of segregation, but they were protesting because Black and white people were kept apart. A detail is that Black people could not eat in many restaurants and stay in hotels. Another detail is that many Black people had to enter movie theaters in separate doors and sit way up in the balcony. Another detail is that Black people had to sit in the back of buses. And Black and white people had separate water fountains. So our main topic of this section was that people were protesting against segregation. Our details supported why they were protesting against segregation, all the ways that Black and white people were separated. All right, here is our next chunk. So on August 28th, 1963, at 11:30 a.m., the March on Washington begins. The crowd marches to the Lincoln Memorial. As they walk, the people sing, "We shall overcome, we shall overcome, we shall overcome someday." Later, there are many speakers. They stand on the steps of the memorial in front of Lincoln's statue. Each person talks about freedom. The marchers sit on the grass and listen. They know that today history is being made. By noon, the sun is very hot. Some people take off their shoes and cool their feet in the pool. Bag lunches are sold. Each one has a cheese sandwich, an apple, and a slice of pound cake, all for 50 cents. The high point of the day comes at 3 o'clock. The crowd grows quiet. A young black man takes the stage. He looks at the crowd. There are people as far as he can see. The man's name is Martin Luther King Jr. He is a preacher and the son of a preacher. He has grown up in Georgia. He knows all about what it is like to be a black person in the South. Dr. King is a man of peace, but he is also a fighter. He doesn't use his fists or weapons. He uses words. In the South, Dr. King has led many other protests. One was a march in Georgia. Another was a protest against a bus company in Alabama. He has been put in jail many times. There are threats against his life. Some people want him dead, but that does not stop him. Today in Washington, Dr. King speaks words of hope. His speech is about his dream for a better world. He says, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin." Dr. King speaks for 16 minutes and 20 seconds. His voice rises and falls. The crowd leans forward. They want to hear every word. 9 times, Dr. King says, "I have a dream." When Dr. King finishes, there is silence. Then 250,000 people start to clap and cheer. Some people are so moved by his words, they cry. People all around the world watch Martin Luther King Jr. on TV. So does President John F. Kennedy. By early evening, people start back to their cars, to the buses, and to the trains and planes. It is time to go home. The march has ended, but that is not the end of the story. All right, so in section number 3, what was the main topic of that section? What was that section all about? Tell me in the puzzle. So the section was all about people listening to Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, "I Have a Dream." So that was our main topic. What are 3 supporting details that we heard? What is a detail that supports our topic that many people listen to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, "I Have a Dream"? So for example, one supporting detail is that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech was about his dream that all people would be treated equally. It also said that 250,000 people came to listen to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. What is the supporting detail that you heard about people listening to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? Tell me in the puzzle. So another supporting detail could be that President John F. Kennedy listened to his speech. Another detail could be that, another detail could be that Dr. King's speech was 16 minutes and 20 seconds. You could have said that people listened to every word. All right, let's move on to our last section. 1 year later, a law is passed. It is called the Civil Rights Act of 1964. From now on, there cannot be restaurants for whites only. There cannot be separate seating for Black people and white people in any public place. People cannot be kept apart just because of their skin color. It does not change everything, but it is a beginning. And the power of words, the words of Dr. King and others, changes the law of the land. So that last section was really short. But what happens at the end of the book? What was the topic of those last 2 pages? Tell me in the puzzle. So the final section is that laws are made to stop segregation. So we could say the last section is in 1964, the Civil Rights Act is passed. What is a detail that supports that topic? What was the Civil Rights Act? What did that mean for Black and white people? Tell me in the puzzle. So this section talks about how there cannot be restaurants for white people only. There cannot be separate seating for Black people and white people. And people cannot be kept apart because of their skin color. All right, friends, I'm going to pause and take a drink really fast. My throat is very dry. All right, so let's look at our main topics. Topic number 1, in 1963, many people from all over the country came to Washington, D.C. Topic 2, many people went to Washington, D.C. to protest unjust laws. Topic 3 was that in Washington, D.C., many people thought and heard a dream from Martin Luther King Jr. And our final section says that after the March on Washington, many unjust laws changed. So all of these topics can be put together in one big topic. The March in Washington in 1963 sought to end segregation. All right, so all those main topics connect to that March on Washington. The main topics support what happened before, during, and after the march. It told us where people were going, why they were going there, and what happened after they left the March on Washington in 1963. So, I know what you guys are thinking. Miss Mason, what are we going to be writing about with this chunk of lessons? Well, we are going to be using different sources to answer our question. And Miss Mason has made an I can see this. So why is gathering information from sources to answer an important question? So authors use information from different sources to help write books. For example, Miss Mason is using different sources to help write papers to support a topic in my classes that I am taking for college. So authors use different sources to support their writing. So the author of the book had to use multiple sources to answer the question, why were they there? Why were the people in Washington? The article we read about John Chapman, that is an example of a source. Real life pictures, what we saw about the Big Bend Tunnel with John Henry, that's a source. What kind of sources do you think the author of this book we read, what kind of sources do you think he used to write this book? In the book Martin Luther King Jr. and the March on Washington, what kind of sources do you think the author used? Tell me in the puzzle. So when we have read this book, we have seen real life pictures. He probably used books, some articles. He probably used videos and songs. So there are many sources that people can use to support what they are writing about. So people can use books, articles, digital books. We've written a digital book. The internet, songs, timelines. Ooh, we've created a timeline with the American West. Videos, magazine articles, photographs, and paintings. So later in this chunk of lessons 1 through 6, I believe, you guys are going to be using a video source as well as the book we have been reading to support your writing. All right, Smarties, and let's wrap it up with a deep dive. So today we are examining the vocabulary word civil rights. All right, so I'm going to read 2 sentences, and I want you to think about what is different between these 2 sentences. Sentence number 1. I want to eat dessert daily. It's my right. I have a right to food and water. What was different about those 2 sentences? Let me say them again. I want to eat dessert daily. It's my right. Sentence 2 says, I have a right to food and water. What is something that you heard that was different between those 2 sentences? Tell me in the puzzle. So something that I noticed that was different is that in the first sentence, it sounded like I was being very demanding, right? I was demanding to have dessert. I would love to have ice cream daily, but I don't have to have that. The second sentence, I was stating something that I need, right? I have a right to food and water. Now, both sentences had a word that was the same, right. A right is something each person deserves, is allowed to have, get, or do. So, do we deserve to have dessert every day? No. But do we deserve to have food and water? Yes, that is something that each person deserves, should be allowed to have, get, or do. So, if a right is something that we are allowed to have or deserve to have, I want you to give me a thumbs up if these statements are true, or give me a thumbs down if these statements are false. People have a right to education. People do deserve an education. Is that true or false? That's true. People do have a right to education. They deserve to have an education. All right, number 2, people have a right to arrive at school when they want. So people are allowed to arrive at school whenever they want. True or false? False. That is not a right. That is not something that you deserve to do. That is a rule that your school makes. You have a certain time that you are expected to come to school. All right. Number 3, people have a right to not wear a seatbelt. In the puzzle, I want you to tell me, is that true or is that false? People have a right to not wear a seatbelt. That is false. That is a law that protects you. You do not have the right, you do not deserve to not wear a seatbelt. All right, the next one. People have a right to clean drinking water. So people deserve to have clean drinking water. True or false? Tell me in the puzzle. True, right? Everyone should be allowed, deserves clean drinking water. And our last one, people have a right to be treated fairly. True or false? True. People do have the right. People deserve to be treated fairly. So rights are things that a person deserves or is allowed to have or to do. So civil rights, we're going to put the word civil in front of the word rights. Civil rights are the rights of citizens to political and social freedom and equality. I am very sorry, friends. I'm very thirsty. So I'm going to say that again. Civil rights are the rights of citizens to political and social freedom and equality. So, what do you remember about the Civil Rights Act from our book? After the March on Washington, what did the civil rights make possible? The Civil Rights Act. What were people not allowed to do after the Civil Rights Act? Tell me in the puzzle. So after the Civil Rights Act, there were not, it wasn't allowed to have white only restaurants. Everyone had the right to be together. Black people didn't have to sit in the back of the bus or to enter places separately. They didn't have to have black only and white only places. So the Civil Rights Act ended segregation. Now, civil rights is a little bit different. It can be the same, but it can also be different than laws. A law is a rule made by the government that people must follow. So once the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964, it became a rule that everyone had to follow. Let's look at this page and see how the people were demanding for civil rights. And that is why people are in Washington today. They have come to protest. They will speak out against something that they think is wrong. Now, let's look at this red box. This is a sign that was held up. We march for civil rights laws now. So, how were the people demanding civil rights laws? What were they doing to show that segregation was an injustice? What were the people doing? Tell me in the puzzle. They were marching, right? They were marching. They were holding up signs. They were walking together. They were singing. They stayed together to let America know that segregation was wrong and that they wanted civil rights laws. So I want you to think, why are civil rights laws important? Civil rights are rights for all people to be treated equally and to have social and political freedom. Why is that important? Why are civil rights laws important? Tell me what you think in the puzzle. Civil rights laws are important because all people are equal. All people are equal, regardless of the color of their skin. People have a right to be treated fairly. Just because someone looks different from you doesn't mean that they need to be treated differently, right? So these civil rights laws changed America. Now, the end of the book said that there is still a lot of work to do, and there is. But friends, these laws are important because they make it to where people are expected to follow these rules. Everyone is expected to be treated equally. Everyone has a right to eat in the same place as other people, to sit in the same places as other people, to drink from the same water fountains. Guys, this was so crucial for America. So, as we continue to dive deep into the civil rights movement, I want you to think, why were the civil rights laws so important? All right, Smarties, that is it for Wit and Wisdom Module 3, Lesson 3. Remember, keep that growth mindset. Be kind. And I can't wait to learn more with you about the civil rights movement. Happy learning, Smarties.